Hi, everyone, and welcome to the conversation. Today, we are talking about the challenges brought on by the holidays for those who struggle with addiction. I'm Noelle Carmen, and with me today is Clinical Director for Harbor Village, David Duffy, and also with me is Eric Ade. He is the lead therapist for Harbor Village as well. Thank you guys so much for being here and being willing to have the conversation.
Thank you, Noelle. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Let's just jump right into why the holidays are such a struggle. Why especially the holidays?
Well, Noelle, I think that the holidays present a unique struggle for our clients and for people in recovery in general. The holidays are a time of families getting together, celebrating, expressing gratitude, and kind of setting new goals for the new year. And as part of that process, in these family get-togethers, a lot of times there's alcohol flowing as part of these celebrations. And for many of our clients and people in recovery, there's no trigger like our family members. And that family dynamic that could be problematic or that has a foundation of kind of guilt and shame from the person in recovery's perspective could cause a lot of feelings to come up that can be triggers for them to relapse. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so kind of what I'm hearing you say is it brings up a whole lot of feelings that are not familiar to someone who's actually in their active addiction, like feelings of gratitude, feelings of wanting to celebrate, feelings of wanting to connect with family. Those are kind of all the antithesis of where someone might be emotionally or spiritually or mentally when they're in their active addiction. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
So the holidays, what makes it very difficult is because it's about connections. And connections is something when in active addiction, our clients always stress is very vulnerable. They're having to face the reality of the people that they love or care about, and that's kind of what the holidays are about. It's bringing people together. Thanksgiving is about big dinners and big meals and talking about stories. Christmas is about gift giving. New Year's is about reflection of the year and what can we move forward. And in active addiction, a lot of times there's a lot of stagnancy and a lot of trying to avoid at all costs. So what makes it difficult is because the reality is they don't want to face it. So they're kind of imposed to. And that's what could make it difficult for the clients because, they want to make connections. They just are hesitant to take accountability for their choices, especially in active addiction.
So it sounds like there's a lot of being forced to be under the microscope. If you're in your active addiction and you're around people who are like, hey, how are you? What's going on in your life? That's not something you're proud of or something that you're wanting to share. And you certainly don't want to look at it as the person who is struggling. Is that where all of the shame comes from?
I think so. I think a lot of the shame stems from that, Noelle. Folks during their active substance use tend to isolate. And one of the main reasons that they isolate is not because they want to be alone, is because they are extremely fearful of accountability. And our loved ones and our support network are those people that will hold us accountable if they hear us slurring our words, if they notice us doing things that are unhealthy and using drugs or alcohol. So, when someone's mother calls and they don't answer because they're under the influence, and then she calls 15 minutes later, it gets harder and harder and harder. And that's when we talk about that £1 million phone, and they just can't pick it up after a while. And it's just that it's not that they don't want to connect with their family. It's that one of the symptoms of their substance use is that they're just so terrified of that accountability because they might have that internal dialogue that, hey, I'll call them tomorrow. That doesn't happen, and that that dialogue kind of keeps replaying over and over again. So,
talk to us about the family's perspective. You've got the holiday gathering, whatever it is. What kinds of dynamics are happening within the family? Here in walks that individual who's struggling with addiction into this family gathering. What's happening on the family systems side in such a case?
I can
Eric,
take
you
that
want
one.
to try that? Yeah, go for it.
Definitely what the dynamics is, a lot of times the dynamics is emotional attachments. And in active addiction, the last thing that actives want to feel is feelings and emotions. So when there's that emotional attachment, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentments, and also family dynamics. A lot of times when we have family therapy sessions, is just very discouraged because all they want is to have that loved one back, the way that they view that person should be or was. And a lot of times it's very disheartening sometimes because the love that they have for the person is not enough. And it gets them feel that now they have to blame themselves. And now self-realization comes into place. And sometimes, neither party wants to take either accountability or the actions that's needed. And with the dynamics talking about for family, it's just psychoeducation, communication. And one of the hardest stages is to communicate because it takes both people to communicate honestly, and not only to communicate, but to listen to what's actually being said. And we live in a very selfish community, selfish society, and even with emotional attachments, we want what's best for them, but on our time and on our preferences. So a lot of times that can push people further away. That'll be my opinion on it.
So it sounds also like, from the family's perspective, there's possible feelings of disappointment. Like, I had, such high hopes for this person, or this is where I would like this person's life to be right now. And that's not at all where it is. So they walk through. So there has to be this feeling of disappointment, judgment, and then tremendous shame on the other side because that person's not measuring up. So what a painful gap to try to bridge during the holidays. David, what are your thoughts on some of that?
Well, I think that, like you said, Noel, the family members have certain expectations, and the person in recovery can feel those expectations. And in many cases, those expectations feel like the weight of the world on their shoulders. So you have the family members, with these expectations and kind of sometimes walking on eggshells around their loved ones, and the person in recovery kind of walking on eggshells as well around their family members to kind of support those expectations, even if that might not be where they're at in their recovery. So I think, talking about these things before the holidays, and maybe for the family members to kind of ask the person in recovery that they love, how can we support you during these gatherings? How can we make this experience more nurturing for your recovery so we don't trigger you? There's people at the dinner table that might not understand recovery, and we've got 3 sets of families around a table, and then Uncle Bob might say, "Hey, Johnny, how's your recovery going? Wow, the spotlight's on me. All sorts of anxiety and feelings are coming up. I don't want to talk about my recovery at Thanksgiving dinner." But
Right.
these are the kind of things that if you address before the holidays with your loved ones, and hopefully with the people that are hosting these gatherings, that you might be able to kind of prevent in the first place. So, there's a lot of different dynamics. There's a lot of feelings and emotional kind of distress and joy to navigate at the same time, and it can be very difficult indeed. So I think that collaborative planning is and can be important.
And so I think that there's a really important distinction to be made here between an individual, a family member coming in who's in recovery, who's been, through treatment, who's working on living their new sober life versus say a family member who's coming in who's in active addiction, and everyone silently knows, right? Everyone knows the secret. No one's talking about it. And so let's just take that piece by piece first. The tips for families who they have a family member who's in recovery. So things like having the conversation ahead of time, not having the alcohol hanging around. That has to be a huge shift for many families to say, okay, we're going to have this celebration with no wine, with no beer, with no alcohol. Can you talk through that part of a transition for a family? Either one of you, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll just start off. Eric, you can finish it up. I think it's important to have those collaborative discussions, like I mentioned earlier, and to look at things like taking the alcohol out of the equation. At the end of the day, some families won't be prepared to do that, unfortunately. Everyone's level of support and education really is at different points. So I think one of the biggest things someone in recovery can do, as opposed to someone in active addiction, is to reach out to their sober support network and maybe have someone ready on call. Maybe have a sober support go with them. But certainly having that kind of collaborative discussion and letting your loved ones know ahead of time, this is the best way you can support me through the process, I think can be one of the more helpful ways to kind of navigate that situation.
And with strategies for a family that either have been exposed to recovery or addiction, that are in recovery themselves, or that are in denial themselves as well. The biggest thing for me and with our clients is just learning how to have a plan. Plan reduction, relapse prevention, sobriety maintenance, all of those things play a part because it's communicating so we can set firm boundaries that everyone that's involved can implement, can apply, and doesn't leave it up to thin air and let's just be impulsive and hope for the best. Because when you leave it up to chance, unfortunately, the patterns are going to come up, and those patterns are still, very honest, early recovery is still very, on edge, still conflicted, indifferent sometimes. So having a very collaborative, like Dave was talking about, it's true, it's collaboration, and that's where you build those connections, because it's not having to prove anymore. It's just, I'm here to support you and empathize. Whether I've been in your shoes or not, is to try your best to empathize, and that will go a long way. It goes a long way with our clients here. All the groups, all the individual sessions, that's what we try to do. And you get rounding results because they feel, understand, and realize they're not alone. They understand that people actually care and that they're going to be supported. And even if they were to potentially fail or setback, they're there to pick them back up and be beside them versus pointing at their fingers or telling them, I knew this was going to happen. So a structured plan gives organization and both parties a chance to express what their likability is, what their preferences are, so everyone is heard versus assumed to be heard.
Let's talk about when there is no plan in place, in the sense of there's a family, there's somebody who, a family member walks in with inactive addiction. First of all, let's discuss how active addiction is exacerbated during the holidays, to the extent that it might become an actual time where the family goes, we got to get help. We got to get help now. So let's talk about that piece of it. David?
Yeah, I think, the holidays, like we mentioned earlier, are going to bring up a lot of these emotions, a lot of anxiety about having to interact with family members, which brings that accountability to us. Having that kind of natural comparison we do with other family members, and not feeling like we meet those expectations. People do drugs and alcohol for one main reason: they work. They work with a lot of horrible consequences. And so, with all those extra emotions coming during the holidays, people in active addiction are naturally going to use more because they're going to have more feelings to numb and more feelings to escape. And the more you use drugs, the more acute and dangerous consequences you can face, and the more consequences that family members are going to notice and recognize, and kind of acute consequences that you're not going to be able to hide away from. So I think it's just about being supportive, and identifying the safest way to help someone in active addiction. Sometimes confrontation can work, sometimes it can't. We're all unique individuals, and we respond to different interventions in different ways. So I think one of the main things you can do in that situation is to seek professional help, and to see if we can identify someone that can help with an intervention. Maybe there's a family friend that has more experience than we do dealing with active addiction. Maybe they can help navigate us through that process. Maybe if there's past experience with recovery, maybe we can offer going to a meeting with our loved one. Maybe we can have these supportive conversations about seeking help in a productive way, as opposed to kind of, reacting in a negative way. Oh, you're ruining the holidays. That type of thing can just exacerbate the substance use even more. So I think it's about being supportive, seeking professional help, and identifying the unique personality of your loved one, and the families know the best ways to talk to them. Not always, but in many cases they do.
And one of the things that I have actually seen is, with this realization around the holiday time that help is sorely needed, there's also this tremendous hesitation, even on the family side, to get help, because you don't want the holidays ruined. You don't want to spoil Aunt Meg's visit, into the family. You don't want to take time away from the family. What do you say, Eric, to those kinds of things, in terms of barriers to get help from the family's perspective?
Well, and that actually, funny you say that, because that is another reason why sometimes it's difficult. Acceptance, realization, and identifying the actual issues and concerns, and is this the right time? But when we try to overcompensate for a lot of things, we tend to push things under the rug, and we tend to push it away, and we tend to try to avoid it. And for those families, and for any individual struggling with anything, the beautiful part is we have internet now. Google, you can definitely look up support groups, and AA, NA, Naranon, on and on. There's so many meetings and groups and community out there that all they want to do is help, and all they want to do is help you understand. And it's a great way for us to just communicate a little bit more, not only with those of our loved ones, but just communicate, kind of understand better. It is hard. It's a hard decision, and it's not easy. But sometimes the easy ones just keep us in the sickness and keep us in the denial, versus making a little bit tougher of decision, but that has long-term benefits and short-term too. Um, but it's an important thing, and like what David said, is get the professional help. It's to give them a chance to see a different side of their perspective is also very enlightening. Because when we're stuck in our own world, a lot of times that world is not the most accurate of depiction.
So paint a picture for us. We've gone through all of this. We've decided that individual is struggling with addiction. We've got that now. Now we're coming to Harbor Village. Paint a picture as to what the holidays look like at Harbor Village. What is to be expected during the holidays in treatment? David?
Well, I think, one of the things that anyone coming into Harbor Village can expect is a sense of community and a assessment process that's going to involve identifying what each client expects from the holidays. So we could try to provide an environment of care that will be most tailored to their social and cultural needs, to celebrate the holidays, to involve the families. We're certainly going to be decorating. We're going to be certainly focusing on gratitude in November, leading up to Thanksgiving. One of the things we plan on doing is getting a giant pumpkin in the middle of the living room with a Sharpie. And every morning, each client can write one thing they're grateful for on that pumpkin. So when Thanksgiving comes around, we've got a giant gratitude pumpkin, and be able to see how much there is to be grateful for in life, because sometimes in active substance use, it's hard to see those things. So helping the clients focus on that, playing holiday-related games, showing holiday-related movies, focusing on that kind of spirit of the holidays, of togetherness, of gratitude, and primarily of rebirth and transformation and goal setting that the new year provides. I think that's what they can expect. And I think from the family's perspective, based on what Eric was saying, it's approaching recovery as a gift. We get a lot of gifts on Christmas and Hanukkah and over the holidays. And, when we realize that recovery is a gift and treatment is a gift, and it's an investment in the person struggling with the substance use, and it's an investment in the family system, really, I think that will help the families and the clients coming into our program not view it as much as a problem as it typically is, but also as an opportunity to change. And it's a hard and difficult change process, but when you instill that process with hope and opportunity at the start, I think you set that tone for recovery in a much more productive and in a way that we can get some real positive clinical outcomes achieved.
I love what you're saying, and I love the spin that you're putting on it, an investment in life, an investment in relationships, an investment in sobriety. So all the things that I'm hearing you say, you're talking about family visits, you're talking about pumpkins in the middle of the living room, a focus on gratitude, a focus on living a beautiful new sober life. And all this sounds amazing. My question is, there will be many that are listening to this that are in that horrible dark place, that are like, oh my God, who can even do that? I can barely get myself out of bed. And so what would your messaging be? A message of hope for anyone listening to this who has a desire for those things, but cannot bridge that gap in their mind in terms of how on earth would I get from where I am now to writing gratitude things on a pumpkin? Like, can you give a message of hope in that sense, Eric?
Oh, definitely. The beautiful part about recovery, the beautiful part about life is that it gives us an opportunity to look at things a little bit differently. And as a therapist, I'm not here to impose. I'm not here to change. All I'm here for is to provide an opportunity for you to consider a little bit differently. And it's consideration. And it's to give them that slight hope. It's to plant that seed. And when it's their time, it's going to grow and blossom. And for those that are sick and suffering, those that are conflicted, those are pre-contemplative, what we can offer in Harbor Village, David and I and the rest of the staff here, is a possibility to find connection. We as social creatures strive and thrive and seek at all times connections. And a lot of times in active addiction, the things that we tend to lose first is connection of self, connection of spiritual belief, connection of relationships, connections of love, connections of feelings. And here, we're not going to get all that in one day, but I promise you, the first thing that you will get is a high. You'll get a how are you doing, and you'll get welcome. And that alone is going to let you know that you are connected with us and we're here for you. And I will tell you, the beautiful part about working in the treatment center is you get the client at the lowest, or at the most struggling, or at the most questionable in their life, and you give them a couple days to kind of get on their feet, and you're able to give them examples and role models, and not only the therapeutic value of an addict helping another is one of the most beautiful things an addict can give. So it's doing gifts and being grateful and accepting that I can wake up now no longer sick. And that'll be my message.
David, a final message of hope for the holidays for those who are struggling from Harbor Village.
Absolutely, Noel. I think one of the most positive messages of hope is that change can happen at any moment. A lot of times that's hard to wrap our heads around when we're struggling with issues. But the ability to change lies within every individual. And sometimes we need an environment of care to go allow that change to come out, because the environment that we are in at the moment might be suppressing that change. So change lives within everyone, and it can happen at any moment. It can happen on Thanksgiving. It can happen on Christmas Eve. It can certainly happen on New Year's Day, but it can happen at any moment, 365 days of the year. And when we accept that belief into our heart, we can give ourselves that chance to take that first step, which is always the hardest. And that's part of the first step, is realizing that we could change right now, here in this moment, one day at a time.
Beautiful, beautiful words. I want to thank you, David. Thank you, Eric, for just coming on and having this conversation. Appreciate you so much. And I want to thank everyone. Yeah, thank everyone for tuning in and listening to the conversation. So, all right, well, have a wonderful day, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noel.
Have a good one.